Well, can the heart beat without a brain? So here we have the heart beating in your chest. So can your heart still beat without your brain? Well, what we have here is what's a technique we call the Langendorf perfused heart. I believe this is a rabbit heart. I forgot whose lab it's from. I would credit them. But the thing is that this heart, do you see a brain there? There is no brain. It's not CGI, it's not magic trickery. So what we have here is the aorta of this heart, and it's being perfused with a buffer that contains oxygen, glucose, and other things to balance the pH and chemistry of the heart. So it's like artificial blood. That's what the clear liquid is. But this buffer is going to the aorta and being shunted to the coronary arteries via the aortic valve. And then allows the heart tissue to stay alive. And the interesting thing is that the heart tissue is not only alive, it's kicking around. So this is a cool thing about the heart. It can beat without the brain. So again, no brain there. So notice that do all cardiomyocytes contract all at once? So you notice that it's kicking around and moving, but is it every single cell in the heart contracting all at once? Or does it more like some parts are contracting while other parts are relaxing? And what you notice is that, yeah, this is what we call the cardiac cycle. So notice that the entire heart doesn't contract all at once. Some parts move and then it moves in a sequence that repeats over and over. So even though you can contract as many skeletal muscle fibers as you can when you're like lifting a heavy weight in the gym, what we notice is that the whole heart muscle eventually contracts, but it doesn't contract. All parts do not contract simultaneously. You notice that there's a sequence in which the parts and chambers of the heart contract. And that's what we call the cardiac cycle. So again, remember, systole refers to when the heart contracts and ejects blood, and then diastole is when the heart relaxes and fills with blood. Now this is the cardiac cycle, and notice that again, it's a cycle. It repeats over and over again. And I think the Martini version has a slightly better picture. So what we have here is the cardiac cycle. So starting with full relaxation of the heart, what we have here is that between 0 to 100 milliseconds, now we notice that the atria, highlighted in red here, now they're contracting. So this is what we call atrial systole. Again, systole, squeeze. The atria are squeezing and it's helping to push some of this blood into the ventricles. Notice that the ventricles are not contracting yet. This is ventricular diastole. So the first part of this cardiac cycle, the atria is squeezing and the ventricles are filling. Now what happens after? So now we notice that from this part to this part, between 100 and 370 milliseconds, don't worry too much about the exact timing. But what I'm getting at here is now instead of atrial systole, you have ventricular systole. And now you have atrial diastole. And this is a big point I want you to take home, is that notice that atrial systole, which was here, is not the overlapping with ventricular systole. So ventricular systole and atrial systole do not overlap. And why is that? Well, if you have the atria squeezing on top and then the ventricle squeezing on the other side, it's kind of like the atria is trying to push into the ventricles, but remember you have those atrioventricular valves, right? So they end up pushing on the same side of the same valves if atrial systole overlap with ventricular systole. So this is why it's important that the heart doesn't contract all at once. You want it to contract in order to maintain the proper directional flow within the chambers of the heart. So again, it's going from atria to ventricles. Now we can do ventricular systole, and it's going to squeeze up into either the pulmonary trunk or the aorta. Now, after ventricular systole, we have ventricular diastole. So remember, diastole means relaxation, downtime, dilation. So pressure is going to ease up inside the chambers of the heart. And notice that in this long period, now all chambers of the heart are relaxed. So the heart relaxes temporarily, and because of this increase in volume, pressure drops. This allows blood to refill these chambers. And that's why it's important to not only have systole, but also allows diastole to fill these chambers with blood. And this is a cardiac cycle. Now we're back to where we started. So again, big point right here, atrial systole does not overlap with ventricular systole. Okay, so systole, what happens? Big concept, you should know systole involves contraction of this cardiac muscle, and that decreases the volume. So it's like having like a squeeze bottle, right? Or a ketchup bottle. If you decrease the volume, that increases the pressure inside the bottle. What happens to the ketchup? It squirts out. So the chambers of your heart work very similarly. Decrease the volume, increase the pressure, and then you eject blood. Diastole, just the opposite. Instead of contraction, you have relaxation. Now you have an increase in volume. Again, it's kind of like when you wear very tight clothes and then you take that tight clothes or unbutton it, and what happens? Now you have more volume, you can release the pressure. So increase volume, you decrease the pressure inside that chamber. So that's why systole and diastole, essential concepts for understanding the heart.